Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Very happy to say I'm here again with Sky Perryman, the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a group that has been going around the country and challenging the Trump administration's policies on many things. And Sky recently wrote a blistering letter to Governor Abbott about the latest standoff in the state legislature, where more than a third of the state legislature has gone out of state to places like Illinois. I believe some are in New York, to avoid giving the Republicans a quorum with which to redraw the maps and gerrymander themselves more representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. We're going to go into that soon. But first, I want to read from Sky's letter, specifically a very blistering opening paragraph and closing paragraph. She wrote to Governor Abbott just 2 days ago. Last night, you issued a statement stating that you would remove Texas state lawmakers uh, elected by their communities from office if they were not present at 3 p.m. Central Time today at a special session of the Texas House of Representatives. It appears you called the special session to do the bidding of interests outside of Texas, including President Trump, who are seeking to prevent the fair representation of people in their state. You are not a king. You have no authority to remove lawmakers elected by their communities in Texas from office. She wrote that in bold print. The conclusion, she ends the letter. What is happening in the state of Texas is not just a test for the rights of Texans, but one for the rights of everyone who wishes to live in a democracy in this nation. You and your allies have created an unprecedented political emergency for the people of Texas and across the nation. Thousands of Texans have testified against and spoken out to oppose the hastily drawn redistricting maps, which seek to make invisible and take the voices away from millions. While you have some powers as governor, you do not have the power to remove elected Texans from office to accomplish a vendetta that you and the president appear to have against the ability of people to vote against lawmakers who are seeking to protect the people who elected them and against our democracy as a whole. So I thought that's a good way to start things off. Speak to the author of that letter, Sky Perryman, for folks who are just joining us. Tell me where things currently stand, because a couple of days after that letter, Governor Abbott has tried to do just that with the state Democrat.
Yeah,
Explain what's going on.
last night, Governor Abbott went to the Texas Supreme Court, which he does have some allies on that court, but even his allies, I think, are not going to be able to look at this with any seriousness. He went to the Texas Supreme Court last night to try to remove Jean Wu, who is one of the leaders of the Texas House Democratic Caucus, the members. He represents a district in Harris County, which is in Houston, which for those of you that are not Texans, that's the fourth largest city in the country. So, I mean, we're talking about highly significant. I mean, everything, the ability of people to be represented is so significant, but you're talking about a very significant lawmaker in a district who has really done what he needs to do to represent his community, which is to prevent Texans from having their voices silenced by these hastily drawn off-cycle redistricting maps. And so he went to the Supreme Court last night to ask that they find that Representative Wu had somehow vacated his office. There's no legal precedent for that. There's actually no way under Texas law that a governor can bring that type of an action. There's a very unprecedented, very rarely used procedure where you could argue for the vacature of an office if someone truly has abandoned their office, which is not what any of these representatives have done. But those can only be brought by the attorney general or by a county. Not by the governor himself. And so you had last night a bit of a circular firing squad among Texas Republicans. Abbott files his paper with the Texas Supreme Court, and then Ken Paxton comes out with a statement that was actually challenging what Abbott did, because he's gone through the wrong procedure. Although, of course, AG Paxton has also said he wants to have these lawmakers removed from office. So it is just a moving, very dynamic situation in Texas.
Well, it's a very interesting, as you noted, circular firing squad dynamic. I had never expected to see Ken Paxton take a stand against Governor Abbott, even if it's to grab a hold of the mechanism by which to do this illegal thing. Can you talk a little bit about Trump himself has chimed in on this. He has said that he may have to call in the FBI to arrest the fleeing Democrats. Can you talk about that a bit?
I mean, this is really the playbook that you see, this autocratic playbook that you see from Trump, and that frankly we've seen in Texas from Abbott at times over the course of his tenure. In 2021, by the way, Democracy Forward had to sue Governor Abbott because he sought to eliminate the Texas legislature. He actually sought to line item veto the legislature, which is controlled by his own party, when it didn't do what he wanted it to do. So this is this autocratic playbook that we see, and of course, President Trump has been so central to that, seeking to intimidate people for doing their job and for doing what the Constitution and their constituents require them to do. So, it was an expected move yesterday to see this intimidation coming out of the White House. There is absolutely no basis for any type of investigation of lawmakers who are doing what the Texas Constitution and frankly what other, what has been long recognized in many bodies across this country as a tactic of a legislative minority to, at times, deprive the body of quorum when there are really high stakes. And that's what you see these lawmakers doing. Saying if you want us to come to the table, you're going to have to operate in better faith than what you've been doing, and that's what they're trying to force in Texas.
Mm. And you had mentioned Houston. I actually briefly lived in Houston, beautiful city and very diverse city. What are these maps doing to the most diverse parts of Texas in order
Well,
to achieve their political objectives?
yeah, I mean, they're certainly just seeking to manipulate and gerrymander a range of districts to be able to make it harder for people who do make up the majorities in so many communities to have their voices heard in that way. They are blatantly racist maps. They undermine the ability of people to vote. Houston is, I believe, the most diverse city in the entire United States, and is an incredibly vibrant community, as are so many communities throughout Texas, that these maps are seeking to undermine. This isn't the first time that Texas has, and frankly, that the Republican Party has tried to suppress the right to vote, to gerrymander off cycle in Texas. We saw this in the early 2000s. We've seen it. It's been a tried tactic. But this is quite unprecedented that you have the president engaging in such a way that you have actually truly a circular firing squad among Texas Republicans trying to conform to a MAGA playbook that doesn't even represent many of the people that support those lawmakers. So it's a really sad day, but I'm really proud of the lawmakers who are saying, our democracy provides us some tools, and we're going to use those tools to work for the betterment of the people in our community. And we're going to refuse to let people be silenced.
Mm. So when you wrote that letter to Governor Abbott, there was that history. He knows that you have brought a lawsuit in the past against him. Do you think that what do you think about his recent escalation of things? Do you think that that this case before the Supreme Court, you mentioned that it might be too extreme even for a Supreme Court where he has allies?
There's just no legal basis at all for what he is doing. This is not a debatable proposition. It's not something that you could see both sides of. I mean, that is actually why you have Ken Paxton coming out in his own letter. There's also no basis for what Ken Paxton wants to do. There's no basis to claim that individual lawmakers who are going at great expense to themselves and at great cost out of the state of Texas in order to prevent a quorum to protect their communities, that this governor's administration and this Trump administration is seeking to silence, have somehow vacated their office when they're working every single day. So there's just no legal basis for it. The Supreme Court has ordered Representative Wu to respond on Friday, and so I think you'll see a very strong response, both pointing out many of the procedural flaws with this, as well as the substantive flaws. And I think you're going to continue to see the voices of people in Texas show up in court and in communities talking about how harmful This is. We've seen people who were Republican lawmakers in Texas speak out against these maps and against these tactics and against the fact that it seems like Governor Abbott and his allies are putting President Trump over the people of Texas. And of course, no one is thinking about really the people themselves, Abbott, Trump, and our democracy as a whole.
Right. No, I mentioned a little bit earlier about the escalation, the fact that there's this threat in the Supreme Court to try to oust a state lawmaker, the fact that Trump is talking about this use of the FBI. What has been the response of the Democrats who are now out of state and still holding strong?
I think you see them, what I've seen is they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're being clear eyed about what the law does. The law enables them to do exactly what they're doing in order to be able to represent their communities. They're trying to keep the focus on the people, which is what Governor Abbott and the president want to sort of forget about or not consider the people and who is going to be really hurt if we allow this type of intimidation and bullying tactics, this sort of shakedown from the governor and from the president of the United States.
And pulling out the aperture a little bit on this, so the national picture, this has now moved to several other states. There have been Democratic governors who are now responding to what's happening in Texas by saying, okay, you want to politically manipulate the maps. We're going to try to change the maps as well to advantage our party and let the courts decide. Can you give a picture? How many states is that going in now? This seems to keep expanding.
Well, look, I think this is, frankly, I'm very proud of the states that are standing up to say, you're not going to do this to the state of Texas and pick this off one after the other without us stepping up too. A threat to any ability of people to vote, to any community in this country is a threat to all of us. And so you see some of those states really picking up that mantle. So we've seen the governor of New York be very clear. We've seen, of course, the governor of Illinois with where that is where the some of the Texans went on the first day of their quorum break, and then we've seen California, and I think you'll see others follow suit as well. And I think this is like an appropriate response if what is going to happen is the president and far right lawmakers are going to be intent on trying to deprive people of the processes they need to enforce their rights. Now, of course, what we hope is that the Texas Supreme Court rejects this incredibly ridiculous request from the governor, that people in Texas actually are able to come together and realize that these off-cycle maps, these hastily drawn maps, they're not serving anyone's interest. There's literally no basis for them other than that the president is trying to call in a favor and to get on with the real work. In Texas, this is my home community. People have experienced devastation over the floods in the Guadalupe, the Camp Mystic, and so many families are deeply affected. There are so many issues in Texas right now that, of course, we would want the governor to be focused on, and even the president to be focused on, and to be overly political is just it's really harmful. So we're following all of that at Democracy Forward.
And you mentioned Camp Mystic. How has what's going on now impeded the any kind of legislative response to that tragedy?
Well, I mean, the governor and his allies have not really been interested in responses to a range of tragedies throughout Texas. That is one of the latest ones. But you obviously have women in Texas, mothers who face life threatening situations on a daily basis because of what they have done with reproductive health care. The state has refused to expand Medicaid. And then, of course, we're going to see greater threats to health care with respect to the big bill. You have the flooding responses, which we know, and there are documents coming out that suggest that the state was incredibly derelict, and the governor, as well as his allies, were derelict in a range of things that could have been done earlier to make sure that there were better responses. And then there are the climate issues as well. And so I think that all of this is an attempt to distract in the same way we know that the president is trying to distract from the public pressure on him around the Epstein files or around other areas where the American American people are really losing confidence in this administration. And so the way that these autocrats typically respond is to threaten, is to intimidate, and is to try to abuse their power. So we see that for what it is. Texans and the American people are starting to see that. They see that for what it is. And we're going to fight every single day in the courts and in communities to try to make sure that people are protected in this time.
Mm. And you mentioned the intimidation. I want to go back to the threat to use the FBI.
Yeah.
What is even the stated basis? So what would even be an excuse to use and deploy the FBI against Texas lawmakers for being out of state and denying a quorum?
Yeah, I mean, there's really not a basis. They've thrown around words like bribery. They've thrown around words suggesting, which is very interesting, by the way, when you're looking at the Trump administration throwing those words around, when you're looking at people like Ken Paxton, who took millions of dollars when he was criminally indicted, the lieutenant governor of Texas. It's very interesting, but they've thrown those words around. Of course, there's no factual basis for that, and the lawmakers are making that clear in their public statements. They sort of seek at times to throw around words like obstructing elections. That's actually a gaslight. What the only person seeking to obstruct anything right now, it seems like, is the president and Abbott and Paxton and their allies who are trying to actually remove lawmakers from representing their communities and using the powers they have for these communities. So again, it's bluster, but it's dangerous because it's incredibly concerning. It's meant to intimidate people. And of course, you have an administration that has wanted to operate and use its power and weaponize the federal government against people. So I'm really proud of the lawmakers for kind of saying, being out there and telling it like it is. And we'll have to see how all of this plays out. But we'll definitely be following it and lending support in any way we can for people to be able to be represented. That is what we care about at Democracy Forward.
Mm. So to end things off on sort of what Democracy Forward, you have been litigating across the country against a range of Trump administration policies. Give me a lay of the land. What's the latest with what Democracy Forward is doing?
Well, later this week we'll be at 200 days of the Trump-Vance administration. And what we have seen over the last 200 days is that while some elite institutions are backing down, people in this country are stepping up, and we're in court every single day. We've reached the point in our litigation and in the litigation that's been filed overall where we are starting to see this administration back down. They have started backing down in a range of our cases, not in all of them. And of course, there's a lot of work to do to protect people, but they're having to start making some choices about their agenda. The American people do not support this extremism. Americans of all stripes, conservatives, liberals, progressives, independents, moderates, do not like the idea of capturing and disappearing people without due process. They're very concerned about the president's sort of intimidation tactics. And we're really seeing that also in our cases. We sued, of course, when the administration recently tried to deprive public schools and public education systems of billions of dollars. And in response to those litigations, the administration walked away and has now given all the funds to the states and to the districts that need them. And so we're going to keep pressing because we're seeing that we can make real impact on behalf of people. We're going to keep winning in court, and more importantly, we're going to keep utilizing the voices of people, right? People that are stepping up in this time, making sure they have the tools that they need. And we see inspiration in that every single day. So we're just going to keep going.
And the way we started off this Substack Live, I read your letter to Greg Abbott. Is he going to be hearing more from you?
If he continues to harm the people of Texas, I can promise him he will hear more from us.
Well, thank you very much, Sky Perryman, for joining us. If you missed any part of this interview, we're going to be posting it on All Rise News. Just subscribe you can see on the top left of this video. I'm going to be replaying it in full. Of course, I'm going to be following the work that you're doing at Democracy Forward and your litigation across the country and your advocacy. And that you can see Democracy Forward at the top of the screen as well. Thank you all for watching, and look forward to talking again soon, Sky.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.